Just been a fabulous experience. Union Pacific has been working on this for years, and seeing it arrive here in Cheyenne today is nothing but phenomenal. And so, Cheyenne, this big boy is home. This big boy is home. So,
for many, many years, generation of people have asked the question, will a big boy operate? When will the Union Pacific restore a big boy locomotive? Why don't they? And now when the time has come, they just can't believe it. Many people in our travels, when we went to Las Vegas, Salt Lake City, Ogden, California, while we're at the LA County Fair, we were working on it. We had a little area set up, and we wanted the people to come up, and we wanted to engage them while we were working on the locomotive. And well, what are you doing here? Well, we're going to restore this. And many of them, their jaw drops. And so that's why it's exciting, because a big boy will run again. A big boy is what's known as the world's largest steam locomotive. And when I say that, I'm inviting some people to say, well, wait a minute, this locomotive was bigger and this locomotive was heavier. This locomotive could burn more coal and produce more power. This locomotive weighed more on this wheel or that wheel. But unarguably, the 4884 wheel arrangement is the world's largest steam locomotive. 600 tons, nearly 7,000 horsepower. You can't get much bigger than that. They were developed in the late 1930s into the this one was built. The first series was built in 1941. During the war, they needed 5 more. So they built a second class of 5 right in 1944. Back in the days, the train cars were physically smaller. They weren't big like today. You know, they had some big cars, but 50, 60 tons was a pretty heavy load, 70, 80 tons. Today our cars are 130 tons. They had a different type of bearing, which was a little bit harder to pull. So in this day, this locomotive was designed to take the place of 2 locomotives, which is why they developed them. Well, what we'll do when we restore the locomotive, it will be restored to the same functionality when it was brand new. We will take it down as far as we need to, assess everything that we need to, and dismantle and make new and replace with new where needed. So it will be just a massive undertaking. But when the locomotive is restored, it's going to be a fully functional machine that will function in every aspect just like it did when it was in the days of operation. The big boy is an articulated locomotive, and it's 2 locomotives in one. So we're looking at the front engine, or what we call the front engine bed. All of this you see here is one casting. This is a cylinder, this is a valve, this is all cast as one integral piece, all of this. And it goes all the way back to that second cylinder that you can see there. So that is the foundation of the front part of this engine. When we started to work on the big boy, we had to identify various lubricator lines that you can see up here. There's all kinds of little lube lines. Well, many of those lubricator lines were still good. They just looked old. So we went through, and there was a process that we rehabilitated a lot of those lines. We took off all these components that we had to, because all this moves. When this is going down the track, you'll see these connecting rods moving around, reciprocating around. It's just a fascinating motion that we were talking about. Well, this rod here is called a main rod, very heavy. We had to take that off, disassemble it from here, take this portion off, clean and service this guide surface underneath. Just a lot of hard work and a lot of labor. It's a very good locomotive design. But when you look at this compared to the 844, you'll notice a lot of similarity in the design. And that was part of the evolution of the steam locomotive in the Union Pacific. They developed a lot of these parts following years of research and development, developing just the right style of component, the right size, so it could do the work necessary to produce the power necessary. This is the first series. This was the 15th one built, and that was a little bit of a factor in the decision to obtain this locomotive. The first decision was its boiler. Living in that beautiful Southern California climate, it's very favorable to metal, And what deterioration happens very slowly, as opposed to other locomotives in more wetter climates. And the other thing is the number 15th out the chute. You know, that locomotive has got all kinds of little modifications and upgrades that don't necessarily reflect on the drawings and the blueprints and the design, the manufacturing process. It gets better and more efficient as time goes on. And when you look at this locomotive, one of the first things I was looking at was how the two frames were set up and the condition of the wheels. All of that we can fix if there's a little deviation or an error, but it gives you a sense of how good the locomotive was. And the other thing is this was one of the last of the big boys to operate, and there's a whole series of circumstances in the life cycle of a locomotive that made the locomotive available. But in the back of my mind, it makes me think this locomotive was a good machine. And so far that's borne itself out because we came here without incident. The locomotive sat in a museum for 52 years. My crew and I dismantled certain parts of it. Certain parts we couldn't. We could only climb underneath it and clean them and change the oil. So there was only so much we could physically do. And we came 1,300 miles with this locomotive without an incident. Well, I take that back. One of the windows fell out. But we picked it up, it wasn't broken, and we went on our way. We're inside the cab of the big boy, where you can see we've started to take off or take apart some of the steam valves. And we're just taking those off and we're inventorying those. They're actually in very good shape compared to some of the components that we have in our inventory and that we have on the other locomotives. So we're going to use those as a pattern to make new parts. A lot of the steam valves and everything, they're becoming a little bit rare today, that particular design of steam valve. So when we duplicate those, it's nice to have a component that's in pretty good shape that we can use for a pattern. The air brakes here, this is where the engineer operates the locomotive, and over here is where the fireman would operate his controls to fire the locomotive. And you can see the firebox here with some grates already removed. So you can see all the way down, that's where we were standing just a few moments ago. But you can see the many, many years of people walking in the cab and the crews, the floor, that diamond plate has been worn down. And they actually, at a time, probably in the 40s or into the 50s, welded up little pieces there to kind of enhance that anti-skid surface. As much as we like the old original parts, we're going to need to replace this with new. I don't know if we'll be able to duplicate this, but I would like to have this style of diamond plate manufactured just for this purpose, just so it's the original configuration or that design. If we're not able to do that, then it's not practical to, then we'll use a modern diamond plate, much as we did in the 844 locomotive that you can see right out the window there. I remember I was in California, I was speaking to one of our operating superintendents, and a lot of people on the railroad, they love the railroad and they understand it from a day-to-day standpoint. And he was having a difficult time. He asked me, why are we doing this? And I just turned to him because we had an example of a locomotive, as a new locomotive that we were trading for this one. And he said, why are you giving this nice locomotive away? And I said, wait till you see this locomotive. And he later came out and I said, it's like pick any big zoo in our country. And if that zoo had an opportunity to bring back T-Rex, a living, breathing, actual T-Rex, just like in the movie, they'd have to keep it in a big giant electric fence that you could drive around and see this T-Rex. That would be the most popular zoo in the world. That's really not why we chose to do the big boy, but that's really a good example because the big boy is known throughout the world. I've seen foreign publications, Germany, Australia, Great Britain, where they've got articles about this restoration project and the interest that this is generating because it's never going to happen. This locomotive will serve as a public relations ambassador, just like the 844 next to me here. A locomotive is a fascinating machine. You know, I mean, who doesn't like trains? At one time in our lives, boys and girls, they can relate to trains. We have all kinds of cartoons and movies and books that talk about trains and the story that the railroad tells. And it's a fascinating story. And as you get older, your interests branch off. My interest hasn't, and thousands of people is the same way. They love locomotives. So what better public relations vehicle could a railroad have than the world's largest steam locomotive?